Master. I can't stay like this for long.
Shall we tie strings to your limbs to hold you up like a pulcinella? That's what they would do at the academy. They'd prop them up with blocks and tie their hands and feet. The academy treats painting like a job of work.
When he held in his turn the presidency of the convention, Monsieur David wasted no time in using his power to urge the destruction of the Royal Academy. Its doors closed in 1793, and thereafter the dictatorship of the arts in all France devolved on one man, David himself.
I have promised to make public the damage the men of the Academy do to the art they profess. And I keep my word.
TV can change people's lives. One of the reasons that I'm an historian, one of the reasons that I'm a television presenter and a television producer is because one night in February 1986, I sat down and I watched a series called Artists and Models. And everything clicked. A love of arts that had been embryonic within me became a lifelong passion. The love of history I already had suddenly had a new richness, a whole new dimension. I'm sure that Artists and Models was not the highest rating show that went out on those 3 evenings in February in the middle of the 1980s. But I don't think there's probably anything else that went out that night, a soap opera or a snooker game, that somebody 30 years later is still thinking about.
It was a time of sudden storms, of false alarms, and full of anxiety like a feverish, painful dream. The ground itself was burning as if mined deep by explosives, and you could already sense the rumbling of the volcano that was soon to erupt.
Artists and Models told the stories of 3 of the great French artists who lived from the end of the 18th century, the age of the Revolution, to the middle of the 19th century. So the most tumultuous, chaotic, romantic, dynamic years in French history when France was exploding across Europe. David, Ingres, and Géricault, their lives coincided, but they also overlapped. They encountered one another. Ingres was a pupil of David. Géricault met Ingres, didn't get on with him very well. Their stories come out of a moment in French history and European history, which I think is unique and astonishing. It shows that art is not separate to history, that they aren't two rival humanities, two rival subjects, that art is history and history is art. And art is not the cherry on the cake, it's not decoration on the human story, it's absolutely fundamental to the human story. And it does it through 3 artists who absolutely lived through the dynamism and the terror and the astonishment of their age.
I beg you to believe that I would prefer death to the torments I'm suffering at this moment. No man can condemn me as much as I condemn myself.
In the first program about Jacques-Louis David, what it shows is that David was painting the revolution and the terror of the French Revolution as it was happening. He was called upon and he took the invitation to record events that were happening, the murder of Citizen Marat, one of his most famous paintings, the way that he used classical and allegorical references to the classical world to reflect what was happening in France, new ideas about the Republic, new ideas about citizenship that were emerging, being toyed with and thought through during his times. David was so much part of his time as an artist and as a citizen and as a member of the revolution that he came close to being executed alongside figures who he was associated with in the revolution, particularly Robespierre. There's no way you could tell the story of David only as somebody who stood in front of a canvas and painted portraits. You could only tell it as history.
3 months later, David exhibits at his own studio his masterpiece, the painting of Marat assassinated. Next to it, he puts on show the actual bathtub in which Marat died.
As a 16-year-old watching this, I was just captivated by the history, by the stories, by the characters of these great artists, Jacques-Louis David, Jean-Auguste Ingres, and Théodore Géricault. These incredible stories that intertwined with one another and with their history. It was many years later, when I became a TV producer, that I realized something else about the series, which was that it was technically absolutely brilliant and innovative. I think it's one of the greatest art series ever made. It does something really rare. It has the storytelling and the truthfulness to history of a documentary, but it has the passion and the humanity of a drama. It is technically a drama documentary, not that I knew it at the time. I've produced one drama documentary, and I know how hard they are to do, and I know that no one will be sitting here in 30 years' time talking about the one that I made. This is about as good as it ever gets. I've never seen a drama documentary made as well as Artists and Models was made in the 1980s.
I will not permit such words to be used about a work of mine. I will not permit you to compare me with this divine man. I am nothing, monsieur. Beside him, I am as high as that. Indeed, I am invisible.
It's not just that the drama and the history complement each other and fuse together perfectly. There's lots of moments of innovation. The use of silent film from the early days of cinema, colorized, used as if it were archive, and then the introduction of the drama scenes shot for the series as if it were the silent film and then decolorized or recolorized. The use of very complicated studio shoots. When they talk about Theodore Jericho's love of the form of the horse, he has many paintings of horses. There is a sequence filmed of horses, obviously probably shot in a stable or a military stable somewhere, with very little light, direct light, a single source. Incredibly difficult to do. And those sequences make the cuts between these works of art and the documentary works of art absolutely perfect and seamless. The other thing it does is something which we often forget to do making documentaries today, is it's quiet. It gives you 20, 30 seconds to look at a painting as if you were in a gallery. And that's what captivated me, is that the story brought me in. The clash between history and art drew me into the story, but then the commentary disappeared. The voiceover stopped. It was just the music and the pictures, and it was like being in a gallery. We're often not as good at doing that these days. Sometimes when we make documentaries, we think it's always about the finished result. It's about the answer, it's about the outcome. It's not about the process. What Artists and Models did brilliantly was it told you how paintings were born. It shows you the preparatory sketches. It describes the processes the artists went through to produce these works of art. It shows how they used models, how they used sketches, how they went out into the world to draw in models, to find inspiration from the world of art that pre-existed the paintings they were producing. And what it meant was that when I went to the Louvre and stood in front of the paintings of Jacques-Louis David or Theodore Jericho, I knew how they'd been created. I knew the backstory. I think there's something about giving people the background to a work of art that it's like opening the curtain a little bit, seeing inside the sort of magic into the studio. And that focus on process, not just outcome, I think was brilliantly innovative. The story of Jericho is the story of, in some ways, the classic tortured artist. He died young. He produced very few great paintings. Very few paintings were completed. His great painting, The Wreck of the Medusa, the obsessiveness behind the story of how that painting was produced is one of the great revelations of the documentary. That Jericho found the man who had built the raft when the survivors of this shipwreck had been encouraged to get on the raft to be towed, they were told, to safety. When he wanted to portray death, and there is a lot of death in the story of the raft and the Medusa, he went to the mortuary and he painted people who had died. He went to the hospitals and the hospices and painted people in the moments of death. He even, from the mortuary, managed to persuade them to loan him human limbs that had been severed. And he painted them. He even painted heads of guillotined prisoners, convicts who had been executed, brought them to his studio and painted them. This, in many ways, fragile young man, his obsessiveness led him to this incredibly dark place. But out of that emerged this astonishing painting, and also the moment he chooses to portray, the moment when the last 15 of the 146, I think, people who had gone on to that, the last 15 of them are still alive, and they see on the horizon the ship that is going to save them, the end of the horror that they've been through, a horror that's led to death, violence, murder, even cannibalism. He paints this terrible story at the moment of hope. So it is both kind of tragic and optimistic. It is terrible and wondrous in all sorts of different and challenging and uncomfortable ways. The result of the painting, if you look into it deeply, is as disturbing as the process that Jericho went through to produce it.
They, the ones called Jericho and Delacroix and their like, those who now pretend he is no longer a part of their struggle, of their world, of their time.
One of the things that Artists and Models does brilliantly is it makes use of one of the great resources we have in Britain, which is that we have some of the greatest actors and character actors in the world. And in both the voiceovers and in the drama documentaries, there are just astonishing performances that would be not out of place in a feature film.
Robespierre and his closest allies go to the guillotine. David is spared and returned to prison for 5 months. His life saved, perhaps, by his very incoherence. Certainly his contemporaries never seemed to regard him as a significant force in politics.
I founded a great school. The whole of Europe came to see my paintings.
We often, I think, don't quite manage to make that work these days. I think television drama is having an astonishing golden age. Documentary and drama documentary have become somewhat disconnected from that. There are very few drama documentaries made these days when it comes to art. There's lots of in history, but very few in art. As a producer, as someone who makes history documentaries, not just presents them, I would challenge my colleagues to watch Artists and Models and say, what have we made recently that is as good or better than that? I think it stands out as one of the greatest drama documentaries in any genre, not just in art, that has ever been produced.
There was the most terrible silence for what seemed minutes. Then Ingres burst out, "Well, monsieur, you think what you like, but I have the pretension to copy my model, to be my model's humble servant, and I do not idealize."
Every time I go to Paris, I go to the Louvre, and I go and see the paintings of Jericho and Ingres and David, and I think about a documentary I watched as a 16-year-old. It's been one of the great gifts that television has given to me, this passion, this spark that's never faded. I hope people watching this series many decades after it was created will appreciate that we have long been making some of the best documentaries in the world, in this country, that there is a great tradition, and sometimes we don't look in the archive to remember the high points. I think they'll be surprised by how ponderous at times, how slow the story develops. I think they'll be hopefully charmed by the incredible performances of the artists. I think they'll be surprised by the amount of nudity. This is, after all, a series about models as well as artists. It does strike me watching it now that I'm not quite sure that we would put that level of nudity in a drama documentary on BBC Two these days. Oddly, we might be more prudish than the audiences and the producers of the 1980s. But I think overall, people will feel what I felt as a 16-year-old watching it, that these are astonishing stories.